Advanced Heroquest, Breaking and Entering, Part 2. As the sun set, the elf Torallion and senior apprentice Steiner quickly made their way to the lodge and former headquarters of the engineering guild. As the guildmaster had suspected, it had been set on fire and blazed like a hateful beacon in the city. Acrid smoke billowed from its incandescent innards up into the atmosphere as Tobaro's near constant rainfall fought against its flames. The building was not close to any other nearby structures, as it was surrounded by a large parade ground. Thus, the risk of fire spreading to the rest of the city was not high, unless the wind picked up, of course. The pair's destination was not the lodge itself, but rather the Annex, a separate building that was walled off from the rest of the compound. This had been used as a safe house for the guild's most important artifacts and tomes. Only the guild's elites had access to it, and it had been solely guarded by the guild's dwarf ironbreakers, under the command of the guildmaster's eldest son, Aldar Rinkeldraz. Now, it was all that remained of the once unassailable engineering guild. As the elf and the apprentice neared, it was with a sense of relief that they saw that the Annex still remained intact and unaffected by the inferno which bathed it in orange light. Hidden within the Annex lay 3 of the shards to the shattered amulet that would open up the secret door to the arch-collaborator Marco Broglio's manse. Opening up this door paved the way to killing the traitor himself and saving the city. Steiner handed the key to the Annex's courtyard to Torallion, and the two silently made their way towards its bronze gate. They could already see the hunched silhouettes of Skaven plague monks as they drew closer. This was not going to be easy. For this special secret expedition, the party only consisted of Torallion Leafstar, also known as Torallion Darkstar, and the last of the senior apprentices of the engineering guild, Joseph Steiner. The two heroes began at the top of the stairwell down to the entrance to the courtyard of the guild's annex. The smouldering remains of the burnt-out lodge above billowed smoke into the sky behind them. It still warmed the air, even as the rain began to fall once more and smother the flames. Torallion led the way and moved to the gate to the courtyard to peer through its bars. The centre of the courtyard was filled with rubble, the remains of the old guard tower that must have collapsed during the siege of the lodge. To the right of the gate, a single ratman stood hidden in the corner. At the narrow opening, adjacent to the rubble, another also stood idle, and, beyond the pile of debris, another pair guarded the entrance to the annex itself. Torallion pulled out an arrow and shot at the only one of the Skaven he could see, but his cold fingers slipped on the arrow and he fumbled it, causing it to loudly clatter onto the floor, alerting the Skaven to the intruders. The elf cursed under his breath. Steiner quickly beat a path to be adjacent to the Nagarothi, raised his relic dwarven crossbow and let loose a bolt at the same Skaven Torallion had targeted, but likewise missed. In response, the two nearest Skaven moved to the courtyard's entrance, brandishing their fetid weapons, and prepared to open the gate. The two Skaven on the other side of the rubble likewise left their sentry duties and moved towards the disturbance, just clearing the debris as their two brothers to the fore yanked open the bronze gate. The lead Skaven attacked, but fumbled, giving the elf a free attack. Torallion easily capitalised upon this, hitting the Ratman in return, but he only inflicted a single wound. In the hero's turn, Torallion attacked the wounded Plague Monk and inflicted another 2 wounds on it, killing it before moving through the ingress into the courtyard. Steiner then moved up to be able to get a line of sight on the Skaven in front of the elf and sent a bolt right through its skull, causing the Ratman to drop like a sack of potatoes. The 2 remaining Skaven squealed with zealous anger as they saw their comrades fall to the interloper's weapons and rushed towards the elf and the engineer. The first charged the elf and managed to strike Torallion with his double-bladed staff, inflicting 3 wounds, including a critical. This forced the elf to spend one of his fate points to negate the debilitating damage. The second Skaven then joined his brother Plague Monk, and he too struck the exposed elf, inflicting 2 wounds. The elf then raised his sword and attacked the first Skaven that had attacked him, but fumbled. What was going on? The ferocious Skaven struck back and inflicted 3 wounds on the elf once more, with a pair of critical hits in the mix. Again, the elf had to expend another fate point. This was going badly. Steiner saw what was going on. Ethereal green fumes poured off the debris in the centre of the courtyard. It must have been these that were causing the elf to miss and miss again. He pointed his crossbow at the nearest Skaven. His first shot scored a critical, giving him an additional shot. The first bolt killed the Skaven in front of him outright, and his second inflicted 2 wounds on the remaining Skaven that was attacking the elf. Steiner squeezed the stock on his relic repeater crossbow and swore to thank the Guildmaster once more for such a wondrous gift. The stunned Skaven swung at Torallion, but it was a feeble strike, and then it was the Ratman's turn to fumble. The elf wasted no time in brutally finishing the Plague Monk off. With this, the first combat phase was over, and Torallion immediately moved to search the debris pile, finding some intact leather armour on the corpse of a beheaded dwarf. Steiner likewise gave the courtyard a search, but he found nothing. The pair then moved to the great double doors to the Annex itself and pulled them open. The double doors opened up into a short corridor which contained a pair of doors opposite. 2 Skaven Plague Monks were also waiting for the interlopers in the shadows, but the elf and the engineer got the drop on the wannabe ambushers. Torallion acted first, stepping over the threshold to strike at the nearest Ratman, inflicting 2 wounds. Steiner trusted his crossbow over his dagger and shot a bolt into the other Skaven, taking him out. The surviving Plague Monk grit his teeth against the pain and swung his fetid blades against the elf, causing a pair of wounds, which again Torallion had to negate with the use of another fate point. The elf quickly grabbed one of the healing potions at his waist and gulped down its contents, removing the 2 wounds he had suffered earlier. He then swung his blade at the Skaven, expecting to see it bite into the Ratman's flesh, but instead, the effort he'd taken to drink the healing potion and the natural, disorientating effects of the medicine caused him to fumble the attack. The Skaven could hardly believe his luck and thrust his blade at Torallion. The swords easily bypassed the weak swordwork of the befuddled elf, but couldn't get past the chainmail that Torallion wore. The gift from Heinrich Lowen after the death of Kankerclaw Darkheart again paid dividends. Steiner moved up past the dizzy dark elf and thrust his dagger into the back of the Skaven, doing just enough to kill the Plague Monk. The two adventurers then moved to each of the doors and opened them both simultaneously. The doors opened up into a large room containing a pair of big tables and double doors on the far wall. The room stank with rot and the foul smell of Skaven excrement. 3 plague monks and a sentry stood in the way of the two heroes. The heroes took the monsters by surprise, with Torallion attacking first and immediately inflicting 2 wounds on the Skaven in the doorway. Steiner again shot off a bolt at the Skaven in his doorway and caused 3 wounds, killing the Ratman outright. The Skaven that had been wounded by Torallion struck back, but his swordwork was defeated by the rejuvenated elf. The plague monk nearest Steiner moved to the doorway and slashed at the engineer, but also failed to find its mark. The sentry then came to support the wounded Ratman. Torallion again attacked the stricken Skaven and struck a critical hit, inflicting 5 damage on the plague monk, completely eviscerating the rat in a spray of ichor and sending his entrails spluttering across the floor before striding through the red mist to face the sentry. Steiner tried to fire another bolt at the Skaven on the other side of the door frame, but something went wrong and the bolt snapped in the mechanism and dropped uselessly to the floor. The Skaven sentry hacked at Torallion with his blade, but the elf deftly swatted away his opponent's blows. Steiner too managed to fend off the slashes of the Skaven in front of him through a combination of fancy footwork and the Ratman's blades getting caught in the door frame. Torallion then swung at the plague monk sentry, but again fumbled the attack, with his sword becoming lodged in the long banner pole the Ratman carried. The plague monk struck back, but failed to hit his slippery opponent as the two struggled to free their weapons. Steiner drew his dagger from his belt and stabbed deeply into the plague monk in front of him, causing a pair of wounds and taking the wind out of the Skaven. The sentry facing Torallion again hacked wildly at his enemy, but the elf's frenzied tugging at the rat's banner to free his weapon unbalanced the attack, and it missed. The plague monk that had been wounded by Steiner too tried to attack, but failed to land a blow. Steiner stabbed again with his blade at the bleeding plague monk and gutted it like a fish before kicking its corpse out of the way and entering the room. Torallion too finally managed to free his weapon and drove it into the Ratman's body, causing 2 grievous wounds. The rat struck back but could not penetrate the elf's defences. Steiner aimed his repeater crossbow at the last Skaven and loosed off a bolt, striking him between the shoulder blades and neatly severing his spine, leaving only the 2 heroes in the long room. Both adventurers searched the 2 tables but found nothing useful, and a search of the room also revealed no hidden treasure. And with that, the 2 made their way to the large wooden doors and prepared to kick them open. The doors opened up to a large study. A group of 5 plague monks stood directly ahead of them. A weapons rack, a bookcase, a table, and a locked cupboard also lay in the room. But it was the roaring fireplace that dominated the space. To the left of this, hidden under a pile of firewood, a treasure chest winked in the firelight. However, what drew the hero's eye stood head and shoulders above the Skaven. it was a member of the City Watch of Tobaro. Steiner recognized the man. It was Francisco the Butcher, one of Marco Broglio's henchmen, and so named for the terrifying tally of corpses he had left in his wake. Not to be confused with Francisco the Butcher, also in the City Watch, who was so named for owning a meat shop. In the far left of the room, there was a small barred door. This was the entrance to a small prison cell that the guild used to hold those individuals they wished to interrogate. Through the bars, they could see that a dwarf ironbreaker had been locked inside. Combat began with Torallion loosing an arrow at the nearest blade monk. He scored a critical, allowing him to shoot again, which he aimed at the adjacent ratman. This too struck true. The first arrow inflicted 3 damage, and the Skaven dropped to the floor, an arrow neatly protruding from his eye socket. The second arrow too caused a trio of wounds, and this ratman too curled up and fell down, a lifeless corpse. Steiner added his skill to the fight, taking a shot at the Skaven nearest to him, causing 4 wounds as his bolt pierced the under creature's heart, killing it immediately. With the first rank of the Skaven having melted away under a hail of withering fire, the Butcher ordered his underlings to attack the intruders. The Skaven to Francisco's left charged first, moving on the crossbowman. The blade hit its target but failed to penetrate Steiner's armor. The second ratman threw himself at the elf and managed to get a blade past Torallion's parry work to cause a single wound. Lastly, Francisco the Butcher too moved up, but could do no more than that. Torallion attacked the Skaven nearest to him and rolled a critical, entitling him to another attack. The 2 attacks inflicted a massive 5 wounds as the elf blended the Skaven into a fine red paste with his blade work, before stepping up to face Francisco, the traitorous city watchman. Steiner struck out at the Skaven ahead with his dagger, but unfortunately failed to even hit him. The last of the Skaven ignored Steiner and swung at the elf with wild abandon, but was thoroughly outmaneuvered by his opponent's skill and fumbled his attack. A dark smile split Torallion's face as the elf thrust his blade into the ratman and ran him through. Francisco the Butcher too attacked the elf, and his manic swing caught the elf off his guard with a critical hit. This allowed him to swing again, but his weapon was unwieldy and he fumbled this, giving the elf the chance to attack back. We resolved Francisco's attacks first. He only managed to get a single point of damage though. Torallion's attack back also struck true, but he also only managed to inflict a single wound on the devotee of the dark powers. In the hero's turn, Steiner let loose into the melee with another bolt, but this unfortunately missed. However, Torallion's attack again hit the human and caused another wound on the chaotic thug. Francisco spat blood at his enemy and roared as he hit the elf with a ferocious axe blow. But although it struck home, Torallion's armor protected him, and he again only suffered a single wound. The combat seemed to be slowly going Francisco the Butcher's way, so Steiner took careful aim and shot a crossbow bolt at the twisted city watchman. It struck its target and took off the last of the wounds of the muscle-bound minion, leaving him a spasming corpse on the floor. And with that, the Annex had been purged of enemies. From the cell in the far corner, a voice called out. For a moment, Steiner thought it was the guildmaster, but soon realised his mistake. It was Alda, the Guildmaster's son, and leader of the Guild's Ironbreakers.
By the gods, it's you, Steiner. What are you doing here?
Torallion interjected before the senior apprentice could answer and informed the dwarf that they were on a secret mission to help save the city, and they did not have time to parley with any dwarves who were stupid enough to get themselves captured. Steiner tried to speak, but the elf shot him a glance and he became silent. Torallion then made for the locked cupboard in front of him, correctly deducing that it contained the shards of the amulet they were searching for. Laughter began to erupt from the cell.
No elf can open that lock. If you want what's inside, then you'll need to free me. I can open it for you.
The elf chafed for a moment, but quickly saw the truth of the dwarf's words, and begrudgingly moved to open his cell door. Meanwhile, Steiner checked the weapons rack and found an axe that was still usable, before going on to search the bookshelves, but he found naught of use there. Torallion opened the cell door and gifted Alda his freedom. The dwarf was true to his word and opened up the cupboard for the elf. Within, he brought out the 3 shards from the shattered amulet that would open up the secret entrance below the palace of the usurper Marco Broglio. With their mission complete, the elf moved to open up the final treasure chest, but only found a screech bug and 50 gold crowns. However, the party of heroes were at last in the position to attempt to kill the man who had betrayed them. Squire Marco Broglio, the usurper of Tobaro.